Sometimes not knowing is the beginning of a new journey. Don't you agree? Recently, IPL got over. And I'm not a big fan of IPL. I don't watch too much of cricket. But two images stood out. In fact, two people stood out. One was LSG owner Sanjeev Goenka, and the other was KKR owner Shah Rukh Khan. In fact, not exactly Shah Rukh Khan, it was Gautam Gambhir who stands out. Because if you saw this year's IPL matches, there was one image that went kind of viral. Most newspapers spoke about it, and this image was about Lucknow Super Giants match. And this image is about Sanjeev Goenka kind of reprimanding the owner of LSG, kind of reprimanding KL Rahul in public. On the other side, we have a team owner, Shah Rukh Khan, who never interfered in KKR's matters. In fact, Gautam Gambhir writes, in one of the interviews, Gautam Gambhir says that Shah Rukh Khan very clearly told him, if somebody comes and tells me about acting, I'll feel offended. Similarly, I cannot tell you about how to play cricket because that's your domain. So what Shah Rukh Khan was trying to do was nothing but not encroaching into others' domain. That's humility personified. Now that is what is called intellectual humility. No, I am not talking about IPL here. I can see a lot of you are disappointed because you wanted me to talk about Sanjeev Goenka, more owners. No, this is not about IPL. This is about intellectual humility. Today I intend to explore the meaning of intellectual humility. I'll talk about the enemies of intellectual humility. I'll talk about the key behaviors that displays intellectual humility. And most importantly and relevant for all of you is how intellectual humility is relevant in public services and in professional workspaces. When I say intellectual humility, it refers to a specific kind of humility that is connected to one's beliefs, that's connected to one's knowledge, that's connected to one's convictions. And when I say knowledge, it's not really about expertise or domain knowledge. It can be about your political beliefs. It can be about your religious beliefs. So intellectual humility is a very specific form of humility. Intellectual humility can be internal and external. When I say internal, it's about intrapersonal. When I say intrapersonal, it means being aware of your own knowledge, the strength of your knowledge, at the same time being aware of your knowledge gaps. Now I come to the key aspect of intellectual humility. Intellectually humble person is someone who knows his limitations, who knows the knowledge gap, and he also owns his weaknesses. So intellectual humility is all about owning one's intellectual weakness. Now, when I say external intellectual humility, that means interpersonal. In other words, when you're interacting with other person, when you're presenting your ideas, when you're presenting your points of view to others, you should not impose your points of view. You should keep your ego in check. You should be respectful to others in terms of respecting others' beliefs, in terms of respecting others' convictions. That is interpersonal. We noticed intrapersonal and interpersonal aspects of humility. Let's come down to three components of intellectual humility. The first component, an appropriate degree of attention to our intellectual weaknesses. Remember the word weakness. And intellectual humility is all about owning one's weaknesses. Second component, an accurate assessment of our intellectual weaknesses. That is, understanding your weaknesses correctly. Third component, an effort to own our intellectual weaknesses. You have to make an effort to own your weakness. Talking about intellectual humility, Aristotle said this. Aristotle said intellectual humility is a mean between arrogance and self-deprecation. An intellectually humble person will not be arrogant about his knowledge, at the same time will not be self-deprecating about his knowledge. Remember, intellectual humility is all about the word owning our weaknesses. And there are four big enemies of intellectual humility. The first two are pride and vanity. And both pride and vanity is all about self-focus. And remember the word weakness. When we focus excessively on our weaknesses, that's when pride and vanity comes into play. Let me explain first the difference between what is vanity and what is pride by using Jane Austen. Jane Austen, I'm sure a lot of you must have heard about Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. There she mentions a very key difference between vanity and pride. Vanity and pride are two different things. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves. Vanity to what we would have others to think of us. Let me connect pride and vanity to weaknesses. And remember, intellectual humility is all about weaknesses. A person who's prideful will be obsessive about his weakness. On the other hand, a person who's vain will always keep thinking about what others are thinking about his weaknesses. Remember the difference. The third enemy of intellectual humility is neglect. If you look at the first two, vanity and pride, that was excessive self focus on our weaknesses. The third enemy is neglect. And when I say neglect is an enemy, why? Because what you do in neglect is you ignore your weaknesses. You know that's your weak area. You just keep neglecting it. Instead of working on it, you keep neglecting it. So there's no self growth happening. The biggest enemy of intellectual humility is arrogance. The moment you become arrogant, you ignore your blind spots. You're too cocky about your own convictions. You're not willing to accept your own flaws, knowledge gaps. The moment I say intellectual arrogance, one person comes to my mind, and the person happens to be Jeffrey Skilling, former CEO of Enron. He was knowledgeable, yes, agreed. But he was so arrogant about his knowledge that he was not willing to listen to others' opinion. And his knowledge proved to be the bane of the company. In fact, the company is not there anymore. It's gone bust, thanks to Jeffrey Skilling. So intellectual arrogance makes you blind to your weaknesses, biases, knowledge gaps. So that's why intellectual arrogance is the first step to downfall. We explored the enemies of intellectual humility. Let's understand what behaviors an intellectually humble person will display. And the most crucial behavior an intellectually humble person will display is they'll be open to revising their beliefs. They will own their mistake. Let's go to New York, 1978, City Cop building. It's one of the most important buildings dotting the skyline of New York. The building was complete, occupancy had started. At that moment, William Masuria, the structural engineer, discovered that he had made some mistakes. Yes, he did. And interestingly, he accepted his mistakes and he corrected the structural flaw. So that's the first quality of an intellectually humble person. Curious, seeking new ideas and way to grow. That's the second quality of intellectual humble person. They're always curious to learn more. The third one, they're very realistic and pragmatic about owning and admitting their intellectual limitations. Fourth one, most important one, they are teachable. They respond positively to new knowledge. Now that we identify the enemies of intellectual humility, we understood the behaviors that are compatible with intellectual humility. Let's come down to its relevance. This is important for you guys. Relevance of intellectual humility for professionals, especially public servants. Speaking of relevance of intellectual humility or the word humility in professional domains, I recall reading this book called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, a former senior vice president of Google's people operation. In fact, that's Google speak for human resources. And Laszlo Bock, in that book Work Rule, writes that when he recruits people, when he recruits tech professionals, he not only looks for domain knowledge. He says along with domain knowledge, he also looks for something called intellectual humility. because he's of the opinion that an intellectually humble person is someone who's coachable, who can be mentored, who has the willingness and the keenness to learn. And willingness and keenness to learn is a very important competency or a quality in professional workspaces. Not only tech spaces, even public services, even in civil services, there's a huge learning curve. Intellectually humble person is a very big asset to organizations and departments because of one simple reason. The reason is they are very good decision makers. And the reason why intellectually humble person is a good decision maker is because they know their knowledge gaps. They know that this is a decision I cannot take. I need somebody's help. They'll be open to asking help. At the same time, they make quick decisions also when they know that they're pure of their knowledge, convictions. The next reason why intellectually humble person are in demand in professional spaces are because they are broad-minded. They'll not, when I say broad-minded, that means they'll be open to ideas. They will not be biased. They will keep their prejudices aside. They'll be more inclusive in interacting with other people. They'll not impose their egos or their beliefs on others. They'll not be like Jeff Skillings. Being intellectually humble does not mean you're a pushover. In fact, you're not a pushover. As psychologist Brian Resnick writes, it is a method of thinking that involves being genuinely open to learning from other people and simply accepting that you might be wrong. Let's conclude today's session by one single sentence. Being intellectually humble means being not too big, being not too small, being just right. Happy learning.